For nearly 50 years, my home on Sycamore Street was the quiet heart of a community I'd carefully tended, a place where kindness whispered from every porch swing. Then, the glossy flyers arrived, proclaiming progress and modern living. But all I saw was the shadow of a bulldozer blade, cold and unforgiving, stretching over everything I loved. They thought they could erase us with a signature, but they didn't know the silent anchor of this street was about to fight back. Before we jump back in, don't forget to subscribe while you're listening, and let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Now, take a breath and listen closely. This is my story. The first bulldozer blade had yet to touch our soil, but its shadow already stretched long across our little street, cold and unforgiving. For Patricia Albright, her home on Sycamore Street wasn't just a house. It was the quiet heart of a neighborhood she'd tended for nearly 50 years, a place where kindness whispered from every porch swing and garden gate. Her mornings began with the soft hiss of the coffee machine, the comforting rustle of newspaper, a rhythm of peace. Patricia spent hours tending her small patch of garden, coaxing vibrant petunias from the earth, or baking apple pies for Mrs. Gable next door, whose knees ached too much for baking these days. She was the silent anchor, the one who noticed the wilting roses, the quiet worries, the unspoken needs. She'd leave a thermos of hot tea on old Mr. Henderson's porch when nights grew chilly, or slip a hand-knitted blanket over a neighbour's sleeping baby during. Then, the flyers started appearing. Glossy, impersonal sheets stapled to lampposts, proclaiming opportunity for progress and modern living for a brighter future. Patricia peeled one from the weathered bark of the old oak by her curb, its edges already curling in the damp morning air. The words blurred, but the image seared itself into her mind. Sleek, glass towers rising where their cozy homes now stood, concrete swallowing green lawns, silence replacing the familiar laughter of children. Her hand trembled as she read the bold print. Sycamore Street Redevelopment Project. Acquisitions underway. Below it, a stark, sharp RM Holdings logo and a corporate number to call. A cold dread seeped into her bones, heavier than the morning dew. This wasn't just progress. This was an invasion. She carried the flyer back into her kitchen, the crisp paper feeling somehow contaminated in her hand. The aroma of brewing coffee, usually so comforting, now seemed muted, distant. Her gaze swept around the familiar space. The chipped enamel sink, the worn wooden table where generations had shared meals, the sun-faded curtains she'd sewn herself decades ago. Every scratch on the floorboards held a memory. Every faded paint stroke a story. This house, her sanctuary, was now a target. Later that afternoon, when Patricia stepped out to check on Mrs. Gable, she found the older woman sitting on her porch swing, tear marks staining her soft cheeks. "Did you see it, Patricia?" Mrs. Gable's voice was thin, reedy. "Another one of those notices. They want to buy us out. Says they'll make us a fair offer for our property. After all these years." Her voice trailed off, a sound of profound loss. The porch swing creaked rhythmically, a mournful counterpoint to Mrs. Gable's quiet sobs. "They can't," Patricia said, the words foreign and defiant even to her own ears. Her hands clenched into tight fists. "This is our home. We built lives here." Mrs. Gable shook her head, a grim, weary motion. "It's that Robert Maxwell, isn't it? The mogul. Owns half the city. He wants this land. Says it's prime real estate. They'll just bulldoze everything." The name, Robert Maxwell, hung in the air, a chilling whisper of immense, faceless power. The very sound of it, carried on the soft breeze, felt like a threat. Patricia looked at Mrs. Gable, at the fear etched in her neighbour's aging face, and then at the other houses on their street, each a testament to decades of quiet living, of simple dreams. The thought of it all erased, flattened into a barren landscape for glass and steel, made her stomach clench. A quiet anger, slow and steady, began to simmer beneath the surface of her usual calm, a heat she hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a profound disrespect, a brutal disregard for the very soul of their community, a slow, methodical erasure of everything they were. She took Mrs. Gable's trembling hand, her own now steady, warm. "They haven't bought it yet, Helen," Patricia said, her voice low but clear. "And we're not selling. Not a single one of us." The words felt like a solemn promise, a challenge whispered into the encroaching shadow. But how do you fight a ghost of a man who moves mountains of concrete and steel? A force that seems to exist only in the form of cold, official notices and a chilling corporate logo. How do you stand against a power that believes it can erase decades of life with a single signature? The faint scent of Mrs. Gable's damp, tear-stained handkerchief still lingered in the crisp morning air, a tangible echo of yesterday's fear. Patricia watched a lone robin hop across her dewy lawn, pecking at unseen worms, oblivious to the storm brewing on Sycamore Street. How do you fight a ghost? The question from her own mind, the one she'd whispered to herself just hours before, felt less like a question and more like a heavy stone now, settling deep in her chest. Robert Maxwell wasn't a ghost. He was a force. But forces could be met, couldn't they? One small act at a time. It started subtly. Not with bulldozers, not yet. It started with the mail. Precisely 7 days after the first glossy flyers appeared, the official envelopes arrived, thick, cream-coloured, with that sharp RM Holdings logo embossed in gold at the top. They landed in mailboxes like unwelcome pronouncements. Patricia found hers tucked neatly beneath her usual stack of bills and junk mail. Her fingers paused, almost recoiling from its smooth, cold surface. It felt heavier than it looked, weighted with insidious intent. Inside, the language was polite, corporate, utterly devoid of warmth. It was an initial acquisition proposal, a generous and competitive offer for her property on Sycamore Street. It listed numbers, figures that, on paper, might have seemed substantial to someone who hadn't poured a lifetime of sweat and memories into every plank and pane of glass. But Patricia saw through the polite phrasing, through the calculated figures. It was a cold, transactional hand extended, seeking to pry loose the very roots of her existence. They weren't buying houses. They were buying lives. Later that day, the whispers started. Mrs. Gable called, her voice now a tight, high-pitched tremor. "Patricia, did you get it? They're offering a pittance. A pittance, I tell you. After Frank and I scrimped and saved and put every DMN dime into this place, they think they can just take it." The words were a cascade of disbelief and hurt. "I got mine, Helen," Patricia said, her voice steadier than she felt. She held her own letter, the weight of it still unfamiliar. "It's lower than I expected, too." "Lower? It's an insult," Mrs. Gable's voice cracked. "And old Mr. Henderson, he's beside himself. Says he might have to take it, says he's too old to fight." The desperation in Mrs. Gable's voice was a painful echo of Patricia's own quiet fears. Mr. Henderson, with his shuffling gait and his carefully tended rose bushes, was a symbol of their street's gentle decay, a testament to its age. The thought of him forced out, bewildered and alone, sent a fresh wave of indignation through Patricia. She put down the phone and walked to her living room window, pulling back the lace curtain just enough to peer outside. Sycamore Street looked the same. Children's bicycles lay abandoned on lawns, sprinklers spun lazily. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, but the familiar tableau felt fragile now, a thin veneer over a simmering unease. She imagined the envelopes, identical in every mailbox, spreading fear like an invisible gas. It was a calculated move, this generous offer. Not enough to truly compensate, but just enough to make some of the older residents consider, to tempt the weary into surrender. It was a wedge, driven right into the heart of their cohesion. That evening, Patricia didn't bake. Instead, She put on her sensible walking shoes and started knocking on doors. Mrs. Gable, still distraught, greeted her with a hug that felt more like a plea. Mr. Henderson, his face pale and drawn, showed her his letter with a trembling hand, the numbers seeming to mock his lifelong efforts. Sarah Chen, a single mother across the street, looked at her offer with a mixture of despair and cynical resignation. "It's more than my apartment's worth in this market, Patricia," Sarah admitted, her eyes tired. "I could move somewhere newer, maybe even get a fresh start." Patricia saw the flicker of temptation, the lure of an easier path, and her heart sank. This wasn't just about money. It was about tearing apart the quiet support system that made their street a home. "But what about everyone else?" Patricia asked, her voice quiet but firm. "What about the community garden we just started? What about the potlucks? What about knowing your children are safe playing outside because everyone looks out for them?" Sarah looked away, her jaw tight. The quiet argument hung in the air. Individual gain versus collective loss. As dusk settled, casting long purple shadows down the street, Patricia returned home. Her feet ached, but it was the ache in her heart that was heavier. She'd seen the doubt, the fear, the whispers of individual surrender. This wasn't a fight against a single man. It was a fight against the very nature of quiet desperation, against the corrosive belief that the little people simply couldn't win. She sat at her kitchen table, the RM Holdings letter spread out before her like a map to their demise. She wasn't an activist, not a lawyer, not a public speaker. She was just Patricia Albright, a woman who baked pies and tended petunias. But she knew this street. She knew its stories, its people, its silent strengths, and a fierce resolve, born of deep love and a sudden, sharp anger, began to harden within her. The shadowy threat had shown its face, delivered in slick envelopes and low-ball figures, and now Patricia knew its tactics. The game had truly begun. Have you ever faced a moment where standing up for what you believed in felt like facing down a giant? The silence in Patricia's kitchen that night, after her street-long walk, felt different. It wasn't empty, but pregnant with a new, unfamiliar resolve. She wasn't just a woman who baked pies. She was a woman who saw the fear in her neighbor's eyes, and suddenly, that quiet fire within her flared. Her hands, usually covered in flour or dirt from the garden, now traced patterns on the cool Formica countertop, mapping out a plan. She would gather them, all of them. The next morning, the air on Sycamore Street carried the usual scent of blooming jasmine, but beneath it, a new tension hummed. Patricia walked to the small community hall, a dusty brick building nestled between the local church and the old elementary school. Its wooden doors, peeling paint flaking like old skin, creaked open with a groan. Inside, the main room was cavernous and still, rows of folding chairs stacked against the walls. Mrs. Albright, the hall's caretaker, a woman whose face was a roadmap of concern, looked up from her ledger. "Morning, Patricia. You look like you've been wrestling a bear." Patricia managed a tired smile. "Something like that, Martha. I need to book the hall for an urgent neighborhood meeting." Martha raised a brow. "Another one of those developer fiascos? Seen a few come and go. They always do." She sighed, her gaze drifting to the empty stage. "Folks get riled up. Then they just fade. Too much trouble, I suppose." Her words were a soft caution, a reflection of the weary resignation that often settled over small communities facing big money. "Not this time," Patricia said, her voice firm. Martha met her gaze, a flicker of something new passing between them, a spark of defiance, perhaps. For the next 2 days, Patricia became a quiet whirlwind. She didn't call, she didn't send emails. She walked, from house to house, porch to porch, her sensible shoes wearing a path in the familiar asphalt. She knocked softly, patiently waited. And when a door opened, she didn't raise her voice or preach. She simply looked into the eyes of her neighbors, her own filled with a resolve that needed no shouting. She spoke to Mrs. Gable first, finding her staring out at her wilting petunias. "Helen, we need to talk. All of us. We can't let them pick us off one by one." Mrs. Gable's eyes, still red-rimmed, held a glimmer of hope, then to Mr. Henderson, who stood on his porch, holding the dreaded RM Holdings letter like a death warrant. "They'll give you a bit more if you hold out, George," Patricia said, her voice calm. "But then what? A high-rise where your roses used to be?" Mr. Henderson looked at the paper, then at his gnarled hands, and a slow nod began. Sarah Chen, always practical, met her with a cautious sigh. "Patricia, I need a better life for my kids. That offer could change everything." Patricia simply held her gaze. Could it? Or would it just trade one kind of struggle for another? A struggle where you're alone in a new place, with no one to watch your kids while you work late. Sarah's shoulders slumped. The thought of anonymity in a new place, the loss of their unwritten social contract, was a chilling prospect for a single mother. She knew Patricia wasn't wrong. By the evening of the meeting, the community hall slowly filled. Old Mr. Henderson sat in the front row, his back straighter than it had been in days. Mrs. Gable sat beside him, clutching a worn handbag. Sarah Chen, her children quietly drawing on scrap paper at a small table, sat near the back, a thoughtful frown on her face. Neighbours, usually content with waves and short chats across fences, now looked at each other with a shared, uneasy question in their eyes. The air hummed with a mix of fear and curious expectation. They weren't yet a united front, but they were no longer simply isolated individuals holding frightening letters. They were a room full of people, facing the same impossible choice. Patricia stood on the small stage. No spotlight, no microphone, just the hum of the fluorescent lights above. Her usual soft dress had been replaced by a sturdy, plain blouse, her posture unwavering. She wasn't a politician, just a neighbour, and as her gaze swept across the familiar faces, a quiet strength, born not of power but of unwavering conviction, settled in her eyes. "They want our homes," Patricia began, her voice not loud but clear, cutting through the murmurs. "They want to turn this street into glass towers, and they sent us letters, offering us what they think our lives are worth. But they don't know us. They don't know what this street means. They don't know what we mean." She paused, letting her words sink in, watching the shift in their faces, the quiet desperation beginning to harden into shared resolve. "They think they can erase us with a signature, but we have something they don't." She looked from face to face, a slow, deliberate connection with each of them. "We have each other. We have our stories. They have numbers. We have lives." A ripple of murmurs, then hesitant nods. The silence in the room had shifted again, no longer heavy with fear, but charged with a fragile, dawning realization. The fight for Sycamore Street wouldn't be won with money or lawsuits alone. It would be won with something far more precious, something they hadn't realized they still possessed. Have you ever seen how the smallest act of defiance can become the anchor for an entire community? The fragile realization in the community hall, that quiet understanding of their shared strength, hardened into something more tangible in the days that followed. Patricia felt it like a hum beneath the asphalt, a subtle shift in the neighborhood's pulse. The fear hadn't vanished, but it was now laced with a steely resolve. Her kitchen became the unofficial command center. The worn wooden table, once a canvas for flour and pie dough, was now littered with legal forms, local ordinances, and printouts about zoning laws. Mrs. Gable, no longer shrinking from the fight, arrived daily with freshly brewed coffee and meticulous notes from her phone calls with retired city clerks she knew. Mr. Henderson, his back straighter, spent hours mapping out property lines, his calloused fingers tracing the familiar contours of their block. Even Sarah Chen, her eyes still tired but now alight with purpose, helped organize contact lists, her laptop humming with spreadsheets. They were learning, slowly, painfully, the language of resistance. The phone calls from RM Holdings escalated. Their tone, initially polite, grew impatient, then subtly threatening. "Our offer is still on the table, Mrs. Albright, but it won't be forever. Development plans move quickly." Patricia felt the pressure like a physical weight, but she just held firm. "Our homes are not for sale," she'd repeat, her voice calm, unwavering. One afternoon, a sleek black car idled at the curb outside Mrs. Gable's house. A sharp-suited man emerged, carrying a thick binder. Patricia, watching from her porch, felt her heart thump. This was it. The direct approach. The man knocked. A crisp, insistent rap. Mrs. Gable opened the door, her face a mask of apprehension. They spoke for a long moment, the man's gestures expansive, his voice a low, persuasive rumble that Patricia couldn't quite make out. Mrs. Gable's shoulders slumped, then slowly, almost imperceptibly, squared. She shook her head. A clear, decisive movement. The man's face tightened. He pressed a business card into her hand, turned sharply, and slid back into the black car. The engine purred, then glided away. Mrs. Gable walked back to Patricia's porch, her steps firm. He offered more, said it was his final, most generous offer. She held up the card, then tore it in half, letting the pieces flutter to the grass. "I told him no. I told him we're not selling. Any of us." Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the raw power of her defiance. Patricia smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. It was a small victory, a single brick placed in their wall of resistance, but it was a beginning. The quiet matriarch of Sycamore Street had become its unwavering shield. But how much more could they withstand? The tearing of a business card, the quiet "no" from Mrs. Gable. Those small acts of defiance rippled through Sycamore Street, bolstering spirits, yet only seemed to sharpen RM Holdings's resolve. The polite phone calls vanished, replaced by a relentless campaign of harassment. Men in dark suits now lingered near school bus stops, watching. Trucks with blaring horns and rattling equipment rumbled down their quiet street at all hours, kicking up dust that settled like a film of resentment over everything. Notices appeared on fences, threatening legal action for obstructing urban development. The fear that had begun to recede crept back, colder and more insidious. One evening, Patricia found Mr. Henderson sitting on his porch, not tending his roses, but staring blankly at a faded photograph. His eyes, usually kind, were hollowed out with worry. "They told me they'd start legal proceedings, Patricia." He mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. "Said they'd take my home, then charge me for their legal fees. I don't have that kind of money. Not for a fight." His trembling hands, once so strong, now shook with a fragile palsy. Patricia's heart ached. This wasn't just corporate pressure. It was psychological warfare. They were preying on the elderly, on those least able to fight. The quiet anger that had simmered within her now reached a boiling point. No longer a slow burn, but a searing heat. They couldn't just keep absorbing these blows. They needed to hit back. And they needed an audience. That night, Patricia sat at her kitchen table, the fluorescent light harsh above her. She pulled out an old rotary phone, a relic from a simpler time, and dialed a number she hadn't touched in decades. It was for the city's local news station, a number she'd saved from a community fundraiser years ago. The phone rang for what felt like an eternity, the silence punctuated only by the distant tick of her grandfather clock. Finally, a crisp, professional voice answered. "News desk, how can I help you?" Patricia took a deep breath. "My name is Patricia Albright," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hand. "I live on Sycamore Street, and a real estate company is trying to bulldoze our homes, intimidate our elderly, and destroy our community." She spoke for 15 minutes, each word a carefully chosen arrow aimed at the heart of their injustice. She explained RM Holdings' tactics, the escalating harassment, the fear in her neighbor's eyes. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't lie. She simply laid bare the ugly truth. The next morning, A beat-up news van, its satellite dish folded like a sleeping bird, pulled up outside Patricia's house. A young reporter, camera crew in tow, approached her porch. "Mrs. Albright? I'm Sarah Miller. We got your call. Can you show us what's happening?" Patricia led them down the street, pointing out the fresh tire tracks on lawns, the new, ominous, no trespassing signs that had appeared overnight, the subtle but undeniable shift in the neighborhood's atmosphere. She introduced them to Mrs. Gable, whose voice, though still shaky, found a new strength as she recounted the visit from the sharp-suited man. Mr. Henderson, with unexpected courage, displayed his RM Holdings letter on camera, his hand surprisingly steady now as he spoke of his lifelong dream being threatened. Sarah Chen, usually reserved, spoke passionately about the tight-knit network of support on Sycamore Street and how it was now being systematically dismantled. The camera zoomed in on a child's drawing of a house with a smiling sun, then panned to a looming development pending sign hammered into the earth just yards away. The reporter, Sarah Miller, walked through the community garden, her voice a quiet, empathetic narration, highlighting the contrast between the vibrant life of the neighborhood and the cold, corporate ambition threatening it. Patricia watched them work, a strange mix of hope and vulnerability stirring within her. She was opening up her private world, her neighbors' quiet lives, to the harsh glare of the public eye. That evening, the story aired. Patricia sat in her living room, her small TV screen casting a blue glow over her face. She saw her street, her neighbors, her own words echoing through the quiet room. The reporter's summary at the end was powerful. A small community, fighting a giant. The contact number for RM Holdings flashed on screen, alongside a plea from the reporter for public support. Patricia watched until the local news switched to the weather, a profound sense of exhaustion, but also a quiet pride settling over her. She had chosen to lift the veil, to expose the unseen hand manipulating their lives. The fight had moved beyond their street, beyond their living rooms. It was now in the open, for everyone to see. But how would Robert Maxwell, the invisible mogul, react when the quiet heart of Sycamore Street finally roared? The morning after the news report, Patricia's phone rang without pause, not from RM Holdings, but from across the city. Old friends she hadn't heard from in years, former colleagues from the hospital, even distant relatives, all calling to express outrage, offer support, or simply say, "We saw you, Patricia. You were incredible." The newspaper printed a follow-up, a grainy photo of Patricia standing on her porch, framed by Mrs. Gable's determined face and Mr. Henderson's raised fist. Sycamore Street became a symbol, but the corporate giant didn't roar. It did something far more chilling. It went silent. The trucks stopped rumbling. The men in dark suits vanished from the street corners. No more threatening notices appeared on fences. A strange, unsettling quiet settled over Sycamore Street, heavier than any noise. It felt like the eye of a storm, a deceptive calm that tightened Patricia's nerves. At their next meeting in the community hall, the relief on some faces was palpable. A fragile hope. Maybe they backed off, Mrs. Gable suggested, a hopeful tremor in her voice. Maybe the bad press was enough. Patricia shook her head slowly, her gaze fixed on the empty stage. They don't back off, Helen. Not men like Robert Maxwell. This silence, it's a tactic. They want us to think we won, to relax, to let our guard down. Then they'll strike from a direction we don't expect. The words felt like a cold stone dropping into a still pond, shattering the fragile peace. Sarah Chen, ever practical, pushed her glasses up her nose. "So what do we do then? Wait for the next blow?" "No," Patricia said, her voice firm, resolute. She looked at the faces around the room, seeing the lingering fear, but also the hardening resolve. "We find their weakness. We hit them where it hurts." She turned to Sarah. "You're good with computers? Can you dig into RM Holdings? Public records, past projects, any lawsuits, anything?" We need to know who Robert Maxwell really is, beyond the corporate logo. Sarah nodded, her fingers already twitching for her keyboard. I can try, but billionaires cover their tracks pretty well. Patricia looked at Mr. Henderson, whose history in city planning made him invaluable. And Mr. Henderson? Perhaps you could look into any obscure zoning laws? Any forgotten historical designations for this area? Anything that could make developing Sycamore Street more complicated than they thought? Mr. Henderson's eyes, once dulled by fear, now gleamed with purpose. I know a few dusty archives, and some old-timers who remember every brick laid in this town. Days bled into weeks, marked by the quiet hum of Patricia's laptop in the evening, the rustle of old blueprints, and the hushed phone calls from Mr. Henderson and Sarah. Patricia herself immersed herself in research, poring over old newspaper clippings and faded public records, tracing the rise of RM Holdings from a small, aggressive development firm to the sprawling empire it was today. It was a meticulous, draining process, revealing a pattern of ruthlessness, of communities displaced, of lives uprooted. Each success story for RM Holdings was a tragedy for someone else. Then, one late night, a small detail flickered across her screen, tucked away in an old article about an early contentious land deal from nearly 40 years ago. A small, almost throwaway mention of Robert Maxwell's origins, of a bitter family dispute that propelled him into real estate, and a town name that made Patricia freeze. Maple Creek. The name echoed in her mind. A town not far from here. A place she hadn't thought about in decades. It was a detail so personal, so out of place in the dry corporate records, that it sent a cold shiver down her spine. A connection, a link to a past she thought was long buried, began to surface, subtly twisting the battle for Sycamore Street into something far more intimate and unsettling. What would it mean if the ghost she was fighting wasn't just a powerful mogul, but a shadow from her own forgotten history? Patricia stared at the screen, the name Maple Creek glowing back at her. Not just a place, but a key unlocking a vault of buried pain. A cold shiver, exactly as the research had promised, traced a path down her spine. Maple Creek, the small, forgotten town where she had grown up, where he had grown up, before everything fractured. Robert. Not Robert Maxwell, the faceless mogul, but her Robert, her son, the one who had walked out of her life almost 30 years ago after that bitter, devastating family dispute. A chasm of unspoken words and unforgiven hurts. She remembered the last time she saw him. A stubborn young man, his jaw set, eyes blazing with a mix of defiance and pain she couldn't penetrate. He'd promised he'd never look back, never forget what she'd done, or rather, what he thought she'd done. Now this ruthless force, this corporate bulldozer of dreams, carried his name. RM Holdings, Robert Maxwell. The initials, once so ordinary, now screamed at her from the glowing screen. Her son, the architect of this relentless attack on her home, on her neighbours, on the very life she had painstakingly rebuilt in his absence. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of disbelief and dawning horror. But the old article had hinted at something more, too. His origins, his bitter family dispute, and his meteoric rise from that small town. Could it be coincidence? Patricia's hands, trembling again, flew across the keyboard, pulling up more searches. News archives, social media profiles, blurry photographs from old charity galas. She saw a man in tailored suits, a sharp jawline, eyes that held a familiar, intense focus. It was him? Robert, older, harder, yet unmistakably her son. A profound nausea washed over her, cold and deep. All this time, she had been fighting a corporate entity, a symbol of faceless greed. But it was him, her son, the son she had loved, raised, lost, the boy who had once chased fireflies in their backyard, now a man threatening to flatten other people's backyards for profit. Why? The memory of his departure, His angry accusations flooded her mind. He'd left, convinced she'd betrayed him. But this felt like a deliberate act of destruction aimed right at her. Yet, a tiny, unsettling seed of doubt, planted by the article's mention of his desperate drive, his almost manic need to succeed, began to sprout. It was all linked back to that original rift. It was a twisted, gut-wrenching irony. The merciless mogul, the perceived destroyer of Sycamore Street, was tangled in her own blood, her own past. The computer screen blurred. She was fighting him. Every flyer, every threatening call, every lingering dark suit. It was all from Robert, the very man she had once dedicated her life to, then grieved the loss of, was now her greatest adversary. The world tilted on its axis. Her mind raced, trying to reconcile the boy she remembered with the man on the screen, the man threatening her home. Was this his final cruel revenge? Or something far more complicated? Something born of a pain as deep and old as her own? The cold dread from the first flyer returned, but this time it was laced with a devastating personal understanding. Her quiet fight for her neighborhood had just become a battle for a lifetime of unspoken truths, and for the soul of a son she thought she'd lost forever. How do you confront a child who has become both your enemy and your deepest wound, knowing the truth could shatter everything, or finally, miraculously, begin to heal it? The name, Robert Maxwell, burned on Patricia's screen. His face, older, sharper, yet undeniably her son. The revelation was a physical blow, a seismic shift that cracked open decades of carefully constructed peace. She felt the ground beneath her feet give way, the sturdy foundation of her resistance to RM Holdings suddenly twisting into something personal, agonizing. Her son, the boy she had birthed, nurtured, lost. He was the bulldozer. He was the shadow. She spent the next day in a blur, the world outside her window muted, distant. The phone calls, the neighborhood meetings, the defiant gestures of her neighbors, all felt like a play unfolding while her own reality had just shattered. Her mind reeled, trying to piece together the fragments of the past with this horrifying present. The bitter family dispute, the accusations he'd flung, the door slamming shut on a relationship she thought she'd never recover. Was this his final, ultimate act of revenge, to destroy the very place she found solace after his departure? Or was there something else? A deeper, more complicated wound driving him. Patricia knew she couldn't fight a ghost, but she also couldn't fight her son as an unknown adversary. This wasn't just about Sycamore Street anymore. It was about the echo of a life, a broken bond that suddenly screamed for resolution. She reached out to Sarah Chen, her voice clipped, urgent. "Sarah, I need a direct line to Robert Maxwell. No corporate offices, no assistants, just him. And it needs to be discreet." Sarah, sensing the raw, unfamiliar edge in Patricia's tone, didn't ask questions. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating the murky waters of online contacts, private numbers, and executive schedules. 2 days later, the phone in Patricia's quiet kitchen rang. The caller ID was blocked. She picked it up, her hand steady. "Hello?" A voice, deeper than she remembered, yet instantly recognizable, spoke. "Patricia, this is Robert Maxwell." His tone was formal, guarded, a stranger's voice. A wave of emotion, sharp and overwhelming, hit Patricia. "Robert?" she whispered, the name catching in her throat, thick with unspoken years. "It's been a long time." A pause, heavy with unspoken history. "Indeed. I understand you've been making some noise." His words were cold, a subtle threat. "Noise?" Patricia's voice hardened. "You're trying to destroy my home, Robert, our neighborhood, the place where you grew up." Another silence, longer this time. Then a sigh, deep and weary. "I think we need to talk, Patricia, in person, a neutral location." He named a high-end coffee shop downtown, miles from Sycamore Street, miles from Maple Creek. A place that spoke of his new world, not hers. The meeting felt like a scene from a dream. Patricia sat across a polished mahogany table from a man who was both a stranger and the deepest part of her past. Robert, in a sleek, dark suit, looked perfectly composed, but his eyes, when they met hers, held a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher. Fear? Regret? A desperate hope? "So," Robert began, his voice low. "You know." Patricia nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I do. You're Robert Maxwell. And you want to bulldoze Sycamore Street." He leaned back, a muscle ticking in his jaw. "It's not that simple, Patricia." "Never was with us, was it?" He took a deep breath. "The truth is, I bought up the surrounding land years ago, piece by piece. My plan was to acquire the whole neighborhood, every single home on Sycamore Street." Patricia felt a fresh wave of outrage. "To flatten it? To build your glass towers? How could you, Robert, after everything this place meant to us?" He looked away, his gaze fixed on the bustling street outside. "I know how it looks. Ruthless. Cold. But you don't understand. I heard years ago about the economic struggles here, how the neighborhood was declining. The old houses, they're falling apart. Some of them needed more repairs than anyone could afford. I saw it as a grand gesture, Patricia. A way to make amends for everything. For that day. For everything I became because of it." Patricia's heart pounded. "Make amends? By destroying it?" "No!" Robert's voice was suddenly raw, cutting through the polished calm. "To rebuild it. To create a modern, accessible complex with green spaces, community centers, proper senior living facilities. I was going to name the Central Park after you, after Mom. It was going to be a legacy, a surprise, for you, for Mrs. Gable, for Mr. Henderson, for all of them. I wanted to give you the stability I thought you deserved, the kind I never saw growing up. I wanted to come back, a success, and present it all to you, a triumph, my atonement." Patricia felt the air leave her lungs. The sheer, devastating, misguided scale of it. His brutal business tactics, the intimidation, the relentless pressure. It was all driven by a desperate need to succeed, to surprise her, to atone for a past he believed she held against him. He hadn't known she was leading the resistance. He hadn't known she was the one fighting him. His eyes, when they finally met hers, were filled with a profound, agonizing regret. "You were going to surprise me," Patricia whispered, the words tasting like ash. "By tearing down my home? By terrorizing my friends? I thought you'd be gone. Moved somewhere quieter. I thought people would welcome the chance for new, modern housing, for a new beginning. I never imagined you'd lead the opposition. I just saw the properties, the aging infrastructure. I saw a chance to do something grand, something undeniable, to prove I wasn't the boy who left, the failure. I hired the best, the most aggressive. I told them to get it done, no matter what. I didn't get involved in the day-to-day. I never once thought that you would be the one on the other side of it." He looked utterly broken, the ruthless mogul dissolving into the lost boy she had grieved for so long. The tension in the air was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Tears welled in Patricia's eyes, not of sadness, but of a shattering, complex understanding. This wasn't pure evil. This was a son, twisted by old pain and a desperate need for validation, trying to mend a rift with a wrecking ball. "Robert," she said, her voice shaking, "do you remember when you were little and you wanted to build that treehouse in the backyard?" He flinched, the abrupt memory piercing through his corporate armor. "Yes, but what does that have to do with anything?" "You wanted to build it so badly," Patricia continued, ignoring his question. "You worked all day, hammered your little fingers, painted every board yourself, but you forgot about the big maple tree, the one with the roots that spread out so wide. You just wanted to build. You didn't see the life already there, growing. You tried to build your treehouse around it, but the roots were too strong. And it ended up cracking the foundation of the house, remember?" We had to take it down. Her eyes pleaded with him. A lifetime of unspoken lessons in her gaze. A slow, painful comprehension dawned on Robert's face. He remembered. The shame, the anger, the feeling of failure. He had been so focused on his vision, on making his mark, that he had ignored the living, breathing reality of their past, of her life, of the neighborhood's soul. "This isn't about property, Robert," Patricia said, her voice soft but firm. "It's about roots, and the roots of Sycamore Street are deeper than any concrete you can pour. You wanted to give us stability? You were tearing it away. You wanted to atone? You were causing more pain. You wanted to surprise me? You nearly shattered me." Robert sat in stunned silence, the weight of his misguided ambition crashing down on him. The years of ruthless business tactics, the cold acquisition strategies, the dismissive attitude towards the little people. It all became a grotesque parody of his desperate, secret desire to do good. His empire, built on disconnection, had now collided head-on with the very person he sought to impress. "What do we do?" Robert finally whispered, the hard edge completely gone from his voice. The question hung in the air, fragile but honest, the first sign of a crack in the wall between them. Patricia looked at him, really looked at her son. The boy she knew was still in there, buried under layers of ambition and pain. "We start by listening," she said, her voice filled with a quiet strength that transcended anger. "You listen to the people whose lives you threatened, and then we fix this together." The confrontation in the coffee shop was the beginning of an agonizing, painstaking journey. Robert, stripped of his corporate mask, faced the outrage of the Sycamore Street residents he had terrorized. There were tears, shouting, bitter accusations, but Patricia stood by his side, not defending his actions, but explaining the twisted, misguided intentions behind them. It was a brutal honesty, a public unraveling of a private family drama. Slowly, painfully, a new path emerged. Robert diverted the immense funds meant for demolition and luxury development towards genuine community revitalization. He partnered with Patricia, Mrs. Gable, Mr. Henderson, and Sarah Chen. Instead of bulldozing, he funded repairs, established a community trust for low-income seniors to stay in their homes, and even began buying up nearby derelict properties for true affordable housing, preserving the character of the existing neighborhood while embracing thoughtful, ethical growth. The RM Holdings sign, once a symbol of dread, was replaced by Sycamore Community Trust, its logo now a gentle sapling taking root. Patricia remained its quiet heart, but no longer silent. She was a leader, a negotiator, a bridge builder. Her wisdom, once unseen, was now respected, sought after. Robert, humbled and transformed, found a new purpose in his empire, using his immense resources to uplift communities, not flatten them. Their relationship, once shattered, began to mend, thread by painful thread. There were no grand pronouncements of forgiveness, just quiet Sunday dinners at Patricia's house, where Robert would sometimes catch her eye, a shared understanding passing between them, a silent acknowledgement of the long road they had traveled. He was no longer the ungrateful son, nor the ruthless mogul. He was simply Robert, and she was simply Mom, both finally seeing each other for who they truly were. And Sycamore Street, once living under the shadow of a bulldozer blade, now bloomed with a new kind of vitality, a testament to the power of a woman who chose to fight for her home, and in doing so, found her way back to her family. If you've ever felt like your quiet strength went unnoticed, or faced a challenge that seemed impossible to overcome, what gave you the courage to stand your ground? Your voice matters, and we want to hear your story. Don't forget to subscribe to join our growing community of shared